executive session was announced in advance on Friday, February 19th, 2021, both by listing it on the agenda and posting it online. Executive sessions are not open to the public. Now, it's 1 minute past 6, and we are reconvening a meeting with the public session, which is the board work session today. So I see all members except Vice Chair Bethel. She has excused herself. And except Director Hine, who indicated she'll be joining a minute late. So as soon as she joins, we'll be able to acknowledge. Director Hine, are you there? All right. I would start by reading the Land Acknowledgement. Acknowledgement is critical in building the necessary trust to coexist in harmony with one another. Indigenous tribes and bands have been apparent on the lands of the Willamette Valley across Oregon and throughout the Americas since time immemorial. In this valley, the ancestry of the Kalapuya reaches the furthest back in time, reminding us that this plentiful place has been called home by its original inhabitants long before the names of the snowy peaks and bountiful waters were re-identified. Today, we acknowledge that the people of this land still exist and inhabit this valley, not as heirs to it or artifacts, but as reciprocal contributors to the modern society we live in. We forward our respects to the first peoples of this land, the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon, and those who have ceded lands here. We reflect on the displacement, removal, and genocide of the indigenous people that occurred throughout Oregon and beyond. In so doing, we truly honor the gravity of the past and endeavor to see that people may live in harmony and equity on this land for posterity. May this acknowledgement carry resonance as a tool of peace over the land and waters we mutually rely upon. Please join us in uncovering such truths at any and all public events. Will you please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Please be seated. There are no agenda modifications. I'm going to turn the next section on report reading, Valley Inquiry Charter School Contract, to Superintendent Perry. Superintendent Perry, please take over.
All right. Thank you and good evening, Chair Chandragiri, members of the board. It's great to see you tonight. And I will just notice that it's still light out at 6 o'clock at night, which that means the days are getting longer. All right, so tonight we have first reading on Valley Inquiry Charter School Contract. You have in your board materials a board plate that shows you the changes that were of substance as an overview, and you also have a copy of the contract that shows you the changes. As this is a first reading in March, you will move into a second reading, take any public comment, and take a vote on the contract. And we wanted you to see the changes up front and see them in the contract, but the contract itself will come to you in a final form in March. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent, Dr. Sproles, to walk you through some of the key changes, and then Principal Payne is also here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Superintendent Perry and board members. So this is a reading of the Valley Inquiry Charter School contract. And as we've discussed in the past, The large changes to the contract are called out in the board plate. And then I'm hoping if you all had a chance to take a look at the contract, if you have questions, we do have Dr. Payne here to help us answer questions about the contract. So just for the public watching and listening and for the board, the substantive changes to the contract around Valley Inquiry, there are basically 4 changes that Valley Inquiry is proposing and that the school district is endorsing. The first one involves, and this is the largest one, involves extending Valley Inquiry from a K-5 program to a K-8 program with an international baccalaureate focus for the middle years. And that is currently a gap that we have in our district, that we do not offer an IB or international baccalaureate program for middle school students. And so to be able to offer first 6th, then 7th, then 8th for a K-8 model, Valley Inquiry is would like to increase their enrollment to 285 students from their current enrollment cap of 168. That then is the second substantive change, is that they would now like to offer a middle school program, and they currently only offer K-5. The third change is around an administrative change to allow the Valley Inquiry Board and administrators to have more independence related to 2 different areas. The first one has to do with hiring. So Valley Inquiry under the new contract would have more independence from the district to recruit, hire, evaluate, and supervise new VIX employees who are employed by VIX. And this would pertain only to new hires. Valley Inquiry is not seeking, we currently have a handful of employees who work for Valley Inquiry who are district employees. This would not pertain to them. This is for new hires. And then the second step towards becoming more independent from the school district involves more financial independence. And it was changing some language in the contract from having Valley Inquiry turn their contract to the district and we would approve it. So instead of approving their budget and watching over their fiscal matters, which should really be the responsibility of the charter school itself, we've changed the language to now we will accept their contract, but we aren't the people who are responsible for auditing it and maintaining their fiscal services throughout the year. So again, it's a move overall that the school district would like to make to be able to have our charters have a little bit more independence as charter schools. So those are the 4 large areas. The track changes that you have in the contract that is part of the board packet don't include all of the changes. There are several changes that are just part of keeping up to date with the OARs and the ORSs. So for instance, reporting requirements to the state. Sometimes the numbers change that we have to, how we report. And some of those changes were made just as part of what we do when we update contracts. But these were the 4 substantive areas. And Dr. Chandragiri, I'm wondering if the board has questions at this point, either for myself or for Dr. Payne. Dr. Payne is on the call as well. He's the principal at Valley Inquiry and at JGEMS.
Dr. Sproles, thank you very much. And I recognize Dr. Kylo is the first question.
Craig, my question is about the hiring of employees. Does that mean we have no responsibility towards them, including evaluation, and they have no claim on us except those employees that go to work, can take a leave of absence from Salem-Keizer to go to work for Valley Inquiry on their new employees?
The second part of that question, Director Kylo, I'm not sure on if in the past we have allowed Salem-Keizer employees.
The law doesn't give us a choice if someone wants to go over there.
No, but if we would grant them a leave, is that what you were asking?
We have to grant them the leave.
Okay. So are you asking what?
If an employee of ours went over to Valley Inquiry and did something that Valley Inquiry didn't like, I don't know what that would be.
Sure.
And then they were terminated, then what's that relationship back with us? Maybe John Bate knows. Paul's raising his hand.
Yeah, Paul Kpis.
So,
because I know we've had this problem in the past.
So the charter board has no legal authority over our employees. So if there were to be a dispute with our employee at a charter school and our employee said, I can no longer work at the charter school, we still have an obligation to that employee. If the charter school said, well, we don't like this employee in our charter school for whatever reason, then we have always tried to figure out a resolution to that. But our employee is our employee, not charter school's employee. When we switched the paradigm so that charter schools could hire their own employees for certain things, then the charter school is responsible, the charter board ultimately is responsible for the employment of that person. We don't have any responsibilities.
We have no they have no claim on us and we have no claim on them.
Right, and our charter contract has a mutual indemnity agreement so that they're responsible for all the claims against them.
Okay, my second point, it's a point, not a question. Maybe there's a question buried in it. But the reason for the financial accountability piece, the fourth bullet, it goes back to a little beauty that, watch Paul Kpis on the camera, folks, when I say this name, Baker Charter School, and the problems that we had with Baker Charter School and their lack of responsibility back to the district. That's when those changes were made, because there was a great deal of financial non-accountability that the district became responsible for. And that was a huge problem. So that makes me very nervous because go ahead, Paul.
I know that there have been issues when charter schools have failed to pay their bills. And I don't recall that the district was ultimately responsible. There were certainly vendors who wanted us to be responsible, that's for sure. And I'd have to check to see how some of those were resolved, but ultimately that we have language in the contract that says we're actually not responsible for the financial contracts that the charter school enters into.
But we are responsible for the money that our citizens give us to be responsible for, to then have some entity that we're working with misspend it. For example, baby cradles, so that the office manager can keep her baby in the front office, or raffle prizes for the parents, or whatever, which is what I remember distinctly from Baker Charter School.
Well, this board has taken action with charter schools on their lack of financial stability, which you'll recall. So
I do, but would this language then nullify that ability?
I need to
take those. So we have another reading. So that's what I'll be looking for.
Okay.
Dr. Blasi, and then we'll kind of go around, make sure everybody, who raised the hand? Okay, sorry. Dr. Lepolpion, we are going to start with you because I'm getting confused with the digital hand raising versus real hand raising.
Hey, no worries. First I want to say thank you, Mr. Payne, for coming, and you've been to quite a few of our recent board meetings, and I appreciate everything you guys do over there. In fact, one time I got a chance to teach a Spanish class for a day at your school, and that was it was a great time. The kids are great, teachers are awesome, so thank you for that. But of course, we have a responsibility to the public to ensure that we're doing things in a way that protects the districts, protects us, protects you, and most importantly, protects our kids and parents. And with that, I wanted to just ask a little bit further into the financial responsibility piece that Paul was talking about. Where's the line between, and I'm not sure who has the best answer for this. Where's the line between where the district is responsible for the finances versus the charter school before this change and after this change? I want to know where's the line drawn, so that way, we're clear moving forward what it would look like.
And can I just clarify, and then possibly Paul Kpis can help answer that question on the finances for charters. In related specifically to the VIX contract, the language changes are on, if you have your contract, it's on page 9, where it says budget at the top, and it says on or before June 1st, and we pushed that back to June 1st to allow the charters, and you'll see similar language at the OLE when we have that contract to be able to allow the charters to run their financials for that year. And then it says will be submitted to the district, and we've struck for its approval. So those 3 words were struck because we weren't quite sure what does that approval process look like. And then if you go down to section C on that same the section entitled Financial Records, Audits, and Accounting Reports, it says VIX will submit monthly reports, and we changed those to actually quarterly reports. So it's not, the frequency has decreased. It's not that they won't submit them at all. So so those are just some of the language changes that we are alluding to here. And then I'll let Mr. Kpis answer your question about financial accountability.
Well, it's a broad question. I think that by focusing on the language that we have that's proposed in the contract, when we start a brand new charter school, we probably sometimes prefer weekly financial reports because it's unproven. With the charter school like Valley Inquiry that we've renewed several times over the years, it's a proven charter school. So changing the financial reporting from monthly to quarterly should not have a big effect on us. We don't allow the charter school to use our full faith and credit. In other words, they can't buy stuff with our name on it. They are an independent 501c3 corporation, and we have language in the contract to that effect, which I was going to try to point out to you. So we've got indemnification language, and then on page 23, section D, entitled Full Faith and Credit, this says, VIX agrees that it will not extend the faith and credit of the district to any third person or entity. It acknowledges and agrees that it has no authority to enter into a contract that would bind the district, and that VIC's authority to contract is limited by the same provisions in law or district policy that apply to the district itself. So, VIC's even has limited authority to contract. Its authority is limited by the amount of funds we provide. So it has to have independent audits. So I think we have really very low risk of too much financial entanglement. In the event that VIX were to get overextended in a contract with a vendor, it would not be the district's responsibility to try to unwind that, although we might become involved, because when these charter schools close, they're all our kids. They're going to come back to a district school, and we need to help with that. So there's not like there's no entanglements, but in terms of financial entanglements, it's pretty minimal.
Kpis, you raised your hand.
Superintendent Perry, what were you saying?
I just want to say, from an oversight, as you're the oversight board, we see their budget after it's approved, we get the quarterly reports by this contract, and then we also review their audit. And the money mismanagement are the places that we do need to watch for. And they are the reasons districts shut down charter schools at times. So you kind of retain that authority that becomes either an intervention or a termination of a contract if there are those fiscal concerns in all those processes. But we see their audit.
Thank you very much.
That's a lot more clear now. Thank you.
Yeah. Dr. Blassie.
So having done audits for Secretary of State of charter schools, not through districts, but private charters, and seeing some of the challenges that charter schools have faced, and they largely fall in the financial realm. I think that there is a little bit more risk right now, and I'd like to propose a couple of thoughts. So the charter right now, it's my understanding, is financially sound, although I'm surprised we didn't see the audited financial statement. I was looking for that, and I would like to request the last couple audited financial statements of the charter. But I think the risk is going from 168 students to 285, and how do you financially support that stably, especially if you're looking to do this next year? There's a lot of financial risk in that type of endeavor. And what I would propose is that the district, instead of simply relying on an annual audited financial statement, which is after the fact, and quarterly financial reports, I'm not really sure what that entails, but I would say that expansion period, I think it would be in everyone's best interest for the district to be able to review financial statements, budgets, and things like that without overstepping, but I would say on a more frequent basis during that initial expansion, because that's a very risky financial time. And yes, we may be protected as a district financially, but worst case scenario, if this doesn't work out and the charter ends up in financial difficulties, and worst case scenario were to close, we have students and we have families that are gravely impacted. We've seen, when charter schools have closed, the damage that it causes to students who are in one learning environment needing to suddenly switch because they go and the doors are literally closed without any warning. So I think that I don't disagree with the expansion, but I think from a financial standpoint, risk standpoint, and risk to students and their education, I think we should probably put a few more bumpers, sideboards around this initially. I would like to see the audited financial statements, although, those generally just say they were accurately presented, but it doesn't always give an indication of where financial risks are. So those can be a little misleading, but they definitely could be informative. And then my last request, my favorite request for all charter schools is I would like to see your plan before we approve this for your expansion of over 100, looks like about 120 students. What is going to be your equity and inclusion plan for outreach? And the correct answer is not simply everyone has a fair shot because it's a lottery system. I would like to see what your outreach plan to students and families of color are going to be.
I'll speak to that real quickly. I did present some of that in the last meeting, and I don't think you were in attendance for it.
You expected it.
But it's absolutely something that's always on our list. We've got really good data to show what we've done since our last renewal. So 5 years ago, when you guys were renewing the charter, it was, got it right here, 29% students of color, and we're at 40%. we're 40% for this year. And we're also that we have the highest level of diversity than any other charter in our district. So I think the plan is multifaceted. When I came into the school, it was very clear we cannot do exactly what you just said. Like the idea of, hey, it's free and open and whoever decides, that's not good. It's not an acceptable answer. So how do we reduce barriers for families that A, don't know about our charter, B, can't access our charter, C, have childcare, D, transportation. Some of those we've done some great work in. We've hired people of color. We have almost adopted a philosophy as a school, and it ties in with our mission as an IB school. International cultural respect is just part of the DNA of being an IB school. But really, a big philosophical change is instead of inviting groups of people, when we're thinking of equity or diversity or even inclusivity, instead of inviting people to get their input, we have people of color, people of diverse backgrounds at the decision-making table to begin with. So they're not just giving input, they're actually there making decisions. And so we have recruited people of color onto our school board, people of color onto our staff. I'm, 75% Hispanic. I don't look it, but I am technically that background that brings leadership into that lens of equity. So I think we've done well. 5 years ago, we had 5% of staff were people of color. Today, it's 29% of staff is people of color. So I'm excited. It's part of our DNA. I think it's been a big philosophical shift. As far as specific recruiting efforts, we expanded, we spend $2,000 in just developing a half-page postcard that we send to every single K-5 family in multiple languages to say, here's who we are. We're free. We're not tuition-based. We're a public school. Anyone can be here. We revised our entire website to be more accessible, more user-friendly. That's a new thing. We're trying to include different languages for that, accessibility for our application. So it's definitely something that we have taken seriously, and we have results to kind of show that we've been successful thus far.
Thank you, Principal. Director Blasi, you raised a very good question. I hope you could give some examples of what would mitigate that kind of initial expansion risks at some stage. That would be helpful. How frequently, what kind of audit? Because those are a little technical for me to understand at least.
One of the things I was thinking, I've got 2 notes written, the request for the audited financial statements of the past couple of years. We could get those either to the entire board or just to Director Blasi. But then I think that we'll take the concern, because there's been multiple questions about fiscal oversight and the worry about that. But we'll take the question back both to Garrett Heeman. Rebecca Jacobson's been helping us work on this contract, and Sarah in our Director of Finance, to ask. She works a lot with VIX, so she could, I think, really tell us exactly kind of the places that might be really helpful to work with VIX on that expansion. And I'll tell you, one of the risk factors is if a principal changes. That's, I see as can be an opportunity or a risk, because what we get in Principal Payne is really strong fiscal oversight. And we need to be sure that we have the measures in place for if something happens that Dr. Payne isn't with us. So sorry to talk about you that way, but that is, I think, the point. He's got great fiscal oversight, and I truly believe will only expand in a way that they can afford. And he has that really strong direct connection, but we do need those safeguards in place for if that changes.
Thank you very much. Thank you for explaining that. Advisor Mabinton, do you have any question before I go to Director Goss and Director Hine?
I don't have any questions, but I would agree 100% with Director Blasi. But like Superintendent Perry said, if you guys are expanding in a way where you guys feel like it's not gonna, send those risks, then I agree 100%, because what you're doing is great. That was a really good answer, Mr. Payne. on how you guys are expanding your equity. That was the best answer I've probably heard so far. So yes, because at the end of the day, if this falls apart, it is affecting students and families, and that is my only concern. But I trust this, so yeah.
Well said, well said. Director Gauss. You have to unmute first. Director Gauss, you're still muted. Oops. You just unmuted and went back to mute again. There you go.
There. Okay, I'll start again just quickly. So I have been impressed with all the materials you've brought us, and also extremely impressed with the answers we've gotten when we ask direct questions. So I have no problem and no further request.
Thank
Seems
you.
like it's going well.
Thank you. Dr. Hine?
No questions. Thank you.
Well, I really want to say thank you. This is a wonderful opportunity to start pipelines, you know, what I call my cradle to career pipelines, especially when you have like 40+% of children of color and diverse. This is probably one way to really intentionally close the achievement gap in all possible areas. And there's one section I really want to ask. As a district, we are in the process of redesigning our discipline and safety. Now I see there are some steps that you'll be taking in terms of discipline involving suspension, expulsion, and also the appeal process. How are you going to work with us when we are doing the redesign of discipline, which is going to have a process, and the safety, and how will this and that match?
I love that question. Thank you. So I'll point to something that Director Kylo mentioned in the last board meeting as he was questioning OLE. One of the things that we take to heart is ORS 338.015, and it states specifically, it's the intent that public school charter schools may serve as models and catalysts for the improvement of other public schools and the public school system. And so one thing is I've reached out to David Fender, I've worked with Chris Moore, who are within the district to say, as you think about areas where you're redesigning or reimagining school discipline or student support, how can we be a catalyst for that? How can we model or attempt to do things a little differently that we can kind of pilot in a smaller setting that could be of benefit to the district? So I've engaged in those conversations specifically. I'll tell you, when it comes to the idea of expulsion, I mean, that's just not a word that we utter in our school whatsoever. Every single student belongs in our school. And we have worked really hard to diversify that message to everybody that comes. And it's been difficult conversations with adults usually who think that we should be a certain kind of school or have certain students, and that's just not acceptable. So we're working with the district. Right now, we're in the process of how do we look at school counseling and how do we involve the idea of having some more access to therapeutic care for students that have undergone trauma and need strong supports. So I hope that answers your question, but yeah, we're really working side by side with Salem-Keizer on that.
You know, I really appreciate your answer. Thank you very much, because, you know, would you be able to kind of report to us at frequent interval what the data looks like so that we may learn from your, you know, that little best practice and say, how can we incorporate and kind of learn from each other?
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you very much.
One of the things that we do with our charter school principals is they have the opportunity to also be part of our leadership team. So Dr. Payne attends all our equity training as part of an equity feeder area with a small group of leaders. And also we meet with him on a regular basis. So we are really having those district connections as well. He's very integrated in our system.
I wish to come and visit your school if that's all right, with Superintendent Perry and Dr. Payne. All right. Thank you very much. My son went to IB, but to South Salem. I wish there was a feeder available, and not many people of color know about it. As a South Asian, we are the first family, at least we heard about it, and by word of mouth, other South Asian families from Indian diaspora started applying, or they happen to live in that area. So I think sometimes in immigrant families, if you can recruit one or two, then we can talk to each other, and that's more likely that they will come rather than website or postcard, because they need that little hand holding to jumpstart. That's my experience. Maybe that's just to end up one.
As we think about North Salem High School as an international baccalaureate high school too, VIX really can provide a great feeder into the high school. And then the practices of VIX, then we think about, can we expand them to another middle school feeder area? So it's a great model, because it also feeds strongly in alignment with both North and South as international baccalaureate high schools.
Thank you very much. I think we are ready to go to the next item. Thank you, Principal Payne, Dr. Payne, for coming and sharing this wonderful thing. I always like to hear such best practices. So we come again. We like to hear good words. Yeah. So Superintendent Perry, I think we're like, do we all want about a 3-minute break before we go to the next two important topics? Can we make it 4 minutes, 4-minute break? All right, we'll take a 4-minute break. Everybody, Director Hyen?
Yes, I'm here. I just had to turn off my video for a minute.
All right, all right. So as long as we have the quorum. All right, Superintendent Perry, let's take the hybrid learning and in-person program. Superintendent Perry, would you please?
All right, so we're going to turn this over to both of our assistant superintendents. We're also going to give a short recap of kind of the experiences of the district last week and how we navigated that, just so you can have an update since it's fresh on everyone's mind. I do want to recognize before we begin, I was looking this morning, I think we do have about 8,000 families in our community that includes some of our kids that still do not have power or connectivity. And for those on the line that had multiple days without power, there are families who are experiencing now day 12 without power. So anyway, we thought it would be important just to take a minute tonight to let you know where we are with that, and then we'll move into the hybrid learning presentation. I just want to make note that both Dr. Sproles and Dr. Udos-Natar are also taking some of the content from Mr. Wolf tonight because he's out ill this evening. So with that, I'm going to turn it over, I think, to Dr. Sproles or Dr. Udos-Natar. Take it away.
Thank you, Superintendent Perry. I can take the first few slides here, and then Director McDaniel will also talk a little bit about our outreach as we're reaching out to families this week and what that looks like. But I think you did such a nice job of teeing up how we've responded to the ice storm. As many of us were impacted by this storm, some more profoundly than others. Approximately 140,000 homes and businesses were without internet or without power. Some, as Superintendent Perry commented on, still that is the case. And someone was joking that one day without power feels a little exciting and kind of interesting. 2 days gets really hard. And after that, especially if you don't have resources that can help mitigate, becomes a true hardship. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. So we canceled schools for the entire week, and we are planning on making calendar adjustments on what that could look like moving forward. We had some valiant efforts from our community resource specialists, our CSOCs, our McKinney-Vento advocates. Remember, those are the advocates that work with families that are experiencing houselessness, our migrant education advocates. All of these groups of employees throughout the week reached out to some of our most at-risk families, contacted students, figured out how we can connect them with community supports to be able to help them during the ice storm as they were really experiencing a lot of some of the worst impacts of not having power and internet. Our teachers also stepped up and responded, and we know just the surface of all the different things that teachers did. And when I say the word teachers, I'm meaning our teachers are licensed and classified educators. So there were impromptu food box distributions, some of the larger ones at North High School and McKay. Hundreds of check-ins with families. When families didn't have the ability to answer a phone call, teachers drove by homes, knocked on doors. They distributed clothing, books, blankets, particularly at some of our heavily impacted apartment complexes. We heard about scores of teachers reaching out and making individual contacts. And so once again, I think it was just one way that we saw, again, the way Salem-Keizer Public Schools are an essential part of our community fabric. And one of the most key ways that we support people is helping families that have food insecurity. And a really good example of that, Sodexo, which is a private company and works really closely with our district to be able to provide food for our families. One of the things that happened was that during the catastrophic storm, we lost most of our refrigeration across the district. And so to dispose of thousands of cartons of milk, containers of food, to do that in a way that we have to do to be able to follow the guidelines, to be able to retool those kitchens and then stock grab and go lunches with new food stuffs and get those ready to go was a Herculean task that our food service staff, our Sodexo staff, our transportation staff all worked together to get out thousands of lunch on Thursday and Friday last week in grab and go sites. And so it was yet again, I think, just a touch point of the way that our schools serve essential services to our community. It's much beyond teaching reading and writing. And we know that, but this was just another affirmation of that. And I think Superintendent Perry's words about that we still have families encountering this right now is important for us to recognize that we're not totally out of the crisis yet.
I just want to make a comment to the operational side of the house. We are coming up on March 13th, which is 1 year we've been in this crisis. We've had wildfires, we've had the pandemic, and now this. And you think about it, our risk manager, he didn't have power. He almost lost his home in a fire. But the operational side of the organization, as stressed as they are, they're moving furniture, they're getting prepared for hybrid, they're learning new cleaning protocols, our bus drivers are delivering food. They, again, in an emergency, really stepped up. So I think this moment in time, we have to recognize the extreme pressure our organization has been under and our ability to still respond in an emergency. It's pretty impressive for sure. And I just want to publicly do a huge shout out to our operational side of the house.
So within that, we're still bringing kids back next Tuesday. So that's, I think that attests to the readiness of our organization to be able to do this, and thousands of hours of planning and work and preparation, both on our operational side and with our teachers and educators to be able to make this happen. So here is just a glimpse of the schedule that we've presented several times now. Teachers reported and educational staff reported yesterday to work, went over safety protocols, got ready to be able to welcome back our families next Tuesday. And so we're starting with our K-1 and our elementary self-contained students in a hybrid model. And remember that they will come either on Tuesday or Thursday or on Wednesday and Friday for about a 5-hour instructional day. The following Tuesday, then we welcome grades 2 and 3. So we'll have K-1, 2 and 3. And then the 16th, we welcome grades 4 and 5. So we'll have all in with our elementary students before spring break. Will be in a hybrid model, which has been a goal for quite some time. So just to reiterate, for families listening tonight, or for board members, if you're getting questions from families, so what does a family do if they want to stay in remote learning? So the first step that we can direct families to, they need to contact their resident school administrator. And that means the building administrator where their kids are registered for school. So the family, at this case, at this point in time, it's our elementary families, will contact the building administrator and discuss their options. And it'll give the building administrator a chance to answer any questions. If they have any lingering questions about, well, what do lunches look like? Or what does arrival and dismissal look like? Or do we get to have recess? You know, those are all essential things when you're 6 years old to be able to get a good understanding of what that looks like. If after talking with the principal, the family does want to remain in remote learning, families will either be notified that they will need to be enrolled in one of our EDGE programs. And remember, that's our online program for families. Or there will be a district assigned teacher that will be able to teach them and have them stay digital. Those new students will start with their new teacher in their different environment. Will start as their grade level starts. And so next Tuesday, that would be K-1. The following week, that would be 2-3. And the following week, that would be 4-5. So here's just a little snapshot of some of the planning that's going on. And I'm sure you can appreciate the hundreds of tasks that teachers are accomplishing right now. Remember, They have been teaching largely from their living rooms, or in my space, our spare bedroom. They have been teaching in those spaces at home since last March. So our teachers are now transitioning all of their equipment and their teaching and their materials back into their classrooms, which look really different. They no longer have 28 desks in the room. They might have 11 desks in the room now because they're physically spread out from each other. They have much fewer materials hanging on the walls. And think of a classroom with stuffed animals and things like that. We have much fewer things in the classroom because of the cleaning protocols required between cohorts of students. So this week, teachers reported on Monday. They are reviewing safety protocols and procedures. They're starting to do some instructional team planning, thinking about, and teachers have been thinking about this moment for weeks and weeks. It just didn't start yesterday, obviously, but they're thinking about how can we best meet the needs of our students and what are we going to do next week to greet our K-1. It's important for us as a district to realize these kindergartners that are starting on Tuesday have never been kindergartners in a face-to-face setting for most of them. They've never come into our classrooms as kindergartners. So it's a really important time for them, and our kinder teachers are gonna greet them and love them up as they come into our classrooms. We're also gonna be doing some school-based information for parents, and Sylvia will be talking about that and our community outreach events going on this week. And so Director McDaniel, do you wanna take the next couple of slides and talk about those?
Sure. I'd really like to give my own shout out to the communications department, who's really been working tirelessly to support these reentry efforts. And we have a new community engagement specialist on board as well, Jacqueline Benavides. I don't know if you all had an opportunity to meet her, but you will soon, who's actually just gone out into our communities and talked with partners on really trying to set sessions for families that may not have gotten the information or just misunderstand the information. And so some of the outreach that we're doing this week are with our American Indian and Alaska Native families, our Marshallese families, Arabic, Latino, A and X, Russian, Swahili, and Kpis. And again, we're excited about that because families are actually excited about it. They're coming to the meetings this week and they're interested in hearing more and what their options are if they don't want to do hybrid. One of the other things we're also doing this week that's exciting is actually reaching out into the African-American Black churches. It was suggested by Pastor Ronnie J. Brooks of To God Be the Glory that this is the way we should reach out to some of the African-American families. We so far have a couple of the churches already confirmed for this Sunday. A couple of our staff are going to church. The one particular church, Dominion Covenant Fellowship Church of Oregon, I heard maybe someone on the board just might know somebody at that church. If they do, please give me a call. Ethan would really love to go to church there this Sunday. So please let him know. And let me know, and
He wants to make sure I'm tithing enough. Can't be a cheapskate.
And if anybody's listening from Pauline Memorial, I still am reaching out to you all at Pauline Memorial. That was my mother's church, and I'd be happy to come there on Sunday to have a conversation with you. And then, of course, the Spanish language church, People's Church. So that's going to be a busy week for all of us. A lot of the elementary staff are involved in these sessions. Also, secondary staff have opted to join in on those sessions, and also communications will be there.
Thank you, Director McDaniel. Appreciate it. So I want to give you all, the board, an update on the secondary planning. When we last spoke, last board meeting, we were excited about all the momentum that we're getting around secondary planning. I shared some of the hybrid models and also went into detail about some of the RSSL, the Ready School Safe Learners guidance, which was something that we had to adhere to and which was informing the models that we had. And we were making a lot of progress, and then the ice storm happened. And so what that did is it created somewhat of a delay in really us being able to develop capacity models for each building, because remember, each building is configured differently. And while we have that 35 square foot rule or guidance from Ready School Safe Learners. It's not as easy as saying a certain school is X amount of square feet, therefore we can fit this many kids. We actually need to go into each building in each room and outfit that space. And I want to give credit to Dave Hughes and his crew, the custodial crew and facilities, who have worked tirelessly to prepare our rooms. And almost all of our high schools a few of our high schools are done, and they should all be scheduled to be outfitted by the end of the week. And what happens from there is that will give our master schedulers, our principals, and the planning teams at the high school and middle school an opportunity to look at what our true capacity is at school. And what our hope is and what our priority is to get students back into a hybrid model where they come to school at least two times a week. And if it's close or we don't quite have the capacity, we're going to use our creative thinking to make it happen. But in the event that we can't achieve this, then we would have a fallback plan, which is our applied learning days, which is designed to maximize the level of engagement that students get and really increase or elevate the level of engagement students get to 4 times a week, as opposed to 2 days of CDL and 2 days of applied learning that looks differently right now than it would in the future. And the applied learning model would bring students on campus during that applied learning time. And we try to provide opportunities for extracurricular and engagement. So we really do want high school and middle school families to know that we're committed to seeing students in person, again, elevating the level of engagement that we have with them. And importantly, our priority is to get students in person for direct instruction. So the target date to bring students in is April 13th. That's a couple of weeks after spring break. And that means we have a lot of work to do, but I do want to give credit to our secondary teams. They've been really trying to anticipate what kind of problems might lie ahead so that they can go ahead and start trying to develop solutions so that we can make, that we have confidence that we can get kids in by that 13th, that date of April 13th. Communication plans in development. Our level directors are working closely with communications, led by Director McDaniel and Jacqueline Benavides, who's our community outreach coordinator, to design a communication strategy that looks similar to the elementary school. So again, we hope to have good news for you the next time that we meet in our board meeting in a couple of weeks about the development of bringing secondary back for hopefully 2-day hybrid instruction. Okay, now for an OSA update. And I do have some news that I think is that a lot of families are happy about. And we're certainly excited about creating more opportunities for students and our student athletes. So when we last met, we didn't have an updated information about bringing back full contact sports, but we're pleased to share today, and this is something that we announced about a week ago, that we will be bringing back full contact football, and this is for full contact outdoor sports, and they will start their season the same time that cross country and soccer will be starting their season as well. So practices start at February 22nd. Competition for fall sports, or fall sports season, which will be happening in the winter, is scheduled for March 1st, the week of March 1st. So with our first competitions, I believe for soccer starting March 1st, and our first slated football game starting March 5th. So we received news also as of 3:30, and this is actually after I developed, I designed this board slide. So we had to make some last second edits, but we did receive news that we'd also be able to begin volleyball. Up to today, volleyball was still on hold as we were not permitted to allow for indoor activities beyond 6 student athletes. Now we can expand it to 50. So we will be starting volleyball as of Friday the 26th. I do, unfortunately at this time, because we're a high risk status, we will not have spectators permitted. But if our metrics come down, then we can start looking at bringing spectators so they can cheer our student athletes on in the little competition. So for our next steps for OSAA is to add a full contact addendum. So we have to request an opt-in for full contact sports for cheer. And we're still awaiting updates for music from ODE. And so when we find those things out, we'll let you know. And I actually changed this right before the board meeting because it said we're still awaiting an update for volleyball, but now we're pleased to say that volleyball is starting on Friday the 26th. So that is all I have for OSA updates and for secondary back to school planning. So now we are on to key performance indicators. Do we have any questions before we move on to this?
I have a question.
Yep. Let me kind of go through. We'll start with Director Hine.
Yeah, I know we didn't talk about music. I was just curious, and you probably have talked about it before, but I'm not remembering. Are we doing music? I thought I heard from some students, maybe we're not, but aren't we doing band and orchestra through the model we have right now, the distance learning? Aren't they doing that via Zoom right now?
Correct. Yes, they are. And we've expanded and started elementary choir, elementary orchestra, elementary band has started as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
Advisor Mabinton, do you have any questions? No? All right. Dr. Blasi, do you have any questions?
Yes, one quick question. For secondary, returning for 2 days in April, which is bumping up close to the end of the year, what are the plans with regards to credit deficiency, whether they're seniors or juniors or sophomores or 8th grade math, or is there going to be a focus on those 2 days on speed, math?
Certainly, and here's just a sneak preview because I am going to speak about this when we talk about our key performance indicators, and I'm going to talk about our response to students who need additional support. But we do have a plan to ramp up limited in-person instruction, and we're increasing that exponentially in the next couple of weeks. And I have some numbers that I'll share in a slide that's soon to come. Also, we really are targeting our seniors who need credit recovery, and we'll also be targeting those who we're noticing are slipping through the cracks, or targeted groups that we know will benefit from in-person instruction. We're doing that third quarter. And then the game plan is to continue to provide targeted supports fourth quarter while also bringing students in for direct instruction.
Thank you. So you'll have real-time data for that?
Yeah, I'll actually show you data momentarily.
Okay. Thank you.
I do have that prepared for you.
Thank you.
We are trying to, while we plan to shift the model, we're also planning for summer school and trying to think about, we have quite a few dollars we could put towards summer school. It's being sure we have the capacity to plan summer school and to have the educators who want to teach in summer school. I think as far as wanting to teach virtually, we won't get a good turnout. We're hoping that if we could have in-person summer school, but we'll have a definite full court press on any of our seniors that don't make it by graduation through the summer like we've done in the past. But we are planning for that, and we'll bring that into the boardroom to share with you.
Great, thank you.
We'll go to Director Leopold-Pion, and then I'll go in order, make sure everybody is covered. Director Leopold-Pion.
Yeah, I had a question. I wanted to thank you guys for your work on this and for looking at sports as well. Just from a lot of the kids that I mentor or work with, a lot of those things are really important to them. It helps keep them out of trouble. So, my one question on this, and of course I'll have more later, is we've been taking a really macro view on the reentry point. And my question is, what does it look like on the ground? So what's a typical, because if we're going to be following the protocols for COVID and having a certain square footage per person in a classroom, what's a typical classroom? How many kids are we going to expect to be in a cohort on the elementary level, and then per grade point? What are the numbers on that?
Would you like me to answer that, Superintendent Perry?
That'd be great.
So two different things, Director Lippold, that we can provide. We do have a couple of videos of what the day kind of looks like as a snapshot. Kalapuya Elementary is filmed a video which I think kind of walks you through what the day can look like from a kid's perspective. The cohorts are determined at the elementary level. It's basically half of any one class size that we had. And most of our class sizes don't go above 28-ish. So you're looking at 14 as a max size for that. But you would be surprised, I'll just add, you'd be surprised how few students you can fit into a traditional classroom, meeting the 6 feet buffer around each student and the 35 square foot requirement. So we have gone through and carefully mapped out each classroom to make sure that we have the space to be able to make that work. But that's really why we had to go with a hybrid model and not an everyday model. It's space restrictions. That's it to a T. We just don't have large enough classrooms for 35 square feet for 25 first graders. We do if we break them into 2 groups at 12. So, but for the flow of the day, I think you would be surprised that it looks strikingly similar to a regular school day. Kids have recess, kids have movement breaks, kids have, body breaks throughout the day in the classrooms. They are spread out a little bit more. There's less teachers teaching at the carpet, think of traditional storybook time at a carpet for a kindergarten. You can't sit crisscross applesauce on the carpet anymore because you're knee to knee. You're right next to your partner. You can't do partner listening and partner reading. You can't do elbow reading. You can't do ear to ear storytelling. All the things that we typically do, which are really close contact, we've had to adjust pedagogically to be able to work it out on the way it works. And so there are some adjustments as well. But we can send you, if it would be helpful, we could send the board some videos. And I think getting a look at it helps.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sproles. You have sent us one.
And I would love to say it would be great for you to come see, but as adults, if you come see, that adds another person into the cohort of people and space. Even for us, we're really tempted to be out on those first days, and we're going to really spread out carefully. So great question though.
Director Kylo, you have
just for visitors, just to comment on that in case there's people listening, Superintendent Perry, we don't have the ability to have visitors in schools. And so that includes community visitors, but also parents. We have to restrict that access in schools, particularly because of the cohorts that Superintendent Perry mentioned.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Gauss? You have to unmute, please. Thank you. Now you're unmuted.
So I'm really excited that we have expanded to a possibility of summers and through the summer, because we do have kids that are going to have missed quite a chunk of time that was important to them. And it's the perfect answer, I think. So hopefully we'll get good turnout and we'll have lots of teachers excited about it and ready to go. It's nice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's a good point. Dr. Hine, you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you. So last year, we had an ever evolving situation. So our seniors had to wait. We didn't do our graduations on time as we normally do. And I was just curious if you had a feeling for how many of our seniors this year might be behind in credits so that they would need that summer school to finish. And if there are plans, and I know plans can change, but are there plans that we're going to do regular graduation during our normal week and then a special graduation as we usually do for those in summer school? Or are we going to try to put them all together at the end of the summer? What's the plans on that? And I know they could change, but.
So definitely we want to have graduations during the planned week. I'm assuming, but I need to be sure that, and I'm not 100% sure if Ethan knows the answer, but I'm assuming we will plan for some sort of a summer graduation, because that's really important to those kids that persist through the summer. And previously it had been done in an auditorium. We won't be able to do that. But I don't know that we're in the planning phase for that, but we know how important it is. And Ethan, I don't know if you know the answer to that about summer graduation yet.
I don't know the answer to summer graduation, but it's not too late to plan that right now.
Yeah.
And so we certainly saw the value in giving that extra time to honor those students who persisted through August. And we will find a way, and I'll connect with Larry Ramirez, who's the director of high schools, to ensure that we provide some way to recognize our seniors in the summer as well as
And Ethan, do you just have an experience in this way? We've had a summer graduation, so we just have to figure out what's that look like in COVID, because we didn't have it last year because they did it all with their home high schools, which was the benefit of pushing off graduations last year. That was really awesome for those seniors.
Do we have a sense of how many are, like a percentage? I mean, I know it's still early, of that may have to wait until later in the summer for graduation.
Director Hyen, that's my third to last slide.
Oh, okay. Right. I'll wait.
With percentages.
Okay.
Yeah, we're not going to let out the secret until it's
okay. I'll wait for the surprise.
Yeah.
And Director Ramirez has sent me a text that says we will have a summer graduation.
Excellent.
There we go.
Advisor Mabinton, do you have any? You're going to be graduating, so why don't you tell us what that excitement feels like from your point of view? You have to unmute first. I can't.
It's exciting. I'm just ready to be done. I think when your time comes, you're ready. But it's like a bittersweet moment because adulthood comes after. But it's definitely just exciting to look forward to.
There's a way
That's called senioritis.
A way to hold the advisor Mabinton a little longer to give her the diploma so she can be in the board longer. I'm just kidding. Don't take me seriously.
I'm not.
I just want to say thank you very much. This is really exciting. And it's a huge operational issue that you all are able to kind of juggle so many moving parts and make it happen. So I wanted to ask Ms. McDaniel, is there something we can do as a board to join you when you go to the church, or maybe stand there and say, clap, or what can I do, or what can we do to join you and send the message? I don't mind coming to any of the churches you listed.
We always could use the support.
I'll be there. Sign me in, let me know how I can show up, and anything, hold your flyers or distribute papers, anything you tell us. But we want to send a message that we support what you're doing and how we're bringing our kids back and all the process that all of you are putting together. We really appreciate.
That's great, because the churches are going to let us do a 10-minute presentation. And at the end of the service, they're going to have like a table set up for staff to sit and answer questions of, to the congregation. So
I went to those churches growing up. Seed of Faith. I used to go to this church for years, and now my grandma owns one church.
That's what I mean.
So we've got some inside connection. I have got my 2 vaccines, so I'm kind of put us to work. But we want to send a very strong message that we support all that you're doing in a way that's aligned, and we really want to get that message out. So I'm just offering different ways in which we can get the word out, because community needs a lot of support, and we can all work together in this.
It might be great. We'll send out, Director McDaniel can send out the dates into an email to you. And if you have the ability and you want to jump onto one of our virtual events in the coming days, we've got something every night starting tomorrow night. That would be great. And but again, I'll have her communicate the dates and then email her back, and she'll get you the information if you want to be somewhere. Thank you. That's a great idea.
As long as more than 3 don't show up at the same time, I guess, right?
Yep. Correct.
And we have to go through the whole public meeting. So 3 maximum.
Yeah. She'll make sure that nobody overlaps.
All right, thank you very much. And I really can appreciate all the hard work that has gone in making this happen. And, you know, it's tough, but I'm sure something good will come out. A new skill is learned. And, you know, I was talking to the Chamber of Commerce with Superintendent Perry. Practically every business, every organization throughout the planet has done this, upskilling, learning new tricks and how to kind of thing. So this gave us a glimpse of what it is, how to adapt. And the fact that we are adapting so well is a testimony of your leadership, Superintendent Perry, and all of you. So let us know how we can support this. Okay, with that, we'll go to the next piece. We just got a preview, a little glimpse. Superintendent Perry, the next item on the report is Key Performance Indicators Academic. So it's all yours.
Thank you, Chair Chandragiri and members of the board. I just want to say this is our next Key Performance Indicator report. And I also want to remind you that while we've laid out the key performance indicators, if as a unified board, you decide that there's something else that you would like us to report on, you have that ability to collectively decide that because we've talked already about, you know, how do we think about social emotional health or disproportionate discipline as being one of our key performance metrics. And we would wholeheartedly engage in that discussion. We're bringing forward a different way to think about results. The results policy is clearly an after event. This is a progress along the way. Your questions about graduation, about our kids on track are all the right questions. They're the questions we have, the things we monitor. And so as you're thinking about what do you do about that results policy as a board, think through the lens of these key performance indicators, what makes sense in that results policy, and what might else you want to see either there or in the key performance indicators, because we are anxious to have that conversation, and we've set it up in this way. What we really need, though, is collectiveness around what are the important things and what does the research say about some of the things we should measure. We talk a lot about learning loss, but I also want to really think about, while we have places in the system that we know kids aren't where they would have been, I also know there's lots of things we're not measuring about what our kids have accomplished in the last year. And so I want to be sure we're thinking about how do we accept them where they come to us, help them engage in some social emotional growth as they come from a very isolated pandemic into our classrooms. And then how do we teach them greater reading skills, greater math skills, so that we're not, as they show up to us, just trying to pound in the academics. I had the opportunity to talk to somebody about summer school and what would it mean and what could we do. And, you know, if I was thinking about our elementary kids, I would want them to come play. I'd want them to do hands-on science. I want them to learn what a classroom looks like. I want them to learn socialization with their peers, because we have our elementary kids for more years. And so let's kind of take some of the things we've learned in this pandemic and the grit and the resiliency and the families that have supported our kids, and then capitalize on that moving forward. So I just want to approach that in that way. That doesn't mean we're going to tell you that all kids are on track, that all kids are reading where they would have been, but I just want to be sure we set ourselves up for how do we take kids where they come to us and really set them up for the future. And at the same time, especially our seniors, especially our 9th grade on track, how are we sure we get them the academic remediation and skill that they need to get credits to graduation? So with that, I'm going to turn it over to, I think it's Dr. Sproles.
Thank you, Superintendent Perry. Just a quick reminder to the board about our Spark dashboard. And remember, you have access to the dashboard. It did go down for a couple of days, and I'm not sure. I know Director Kylo is in the dashboard regularly, I know Dr. Chandragiri has spent some time in there as well. If board members would like, and Director Lippold as well. So, and those are just people that I know who have reached out to me saying, you know, like, what's my login? How do I navigate? So if anyone would like a little tutorial on that, again, we'd love to give it. But just as a word, we did, the dashboard was down for a couple of days. And so if you were trying to find, for instance, our freshmen on track, as we figured out the difference between quarters and semesters, it didn't communicate with itself as well as we liked. So, but just a reminder, all of this data and much, much more is on the Spark dashboard. You can disaggregate data in hundreds of thousands of ways on that dashboard. And we're only going to give you a slice of it, but hopefully you can explore that. And if you would like some help getting on the dashboard, just let either Ethan and I know, and we can do that together. So as Superintendent Perry alluded to, this is one of several of our KPIs. This one is focusing on academics. Last month, we heard David Fender, and we heard a little bit about socio-emotional and behavioral supports and how the health of our system. Chris Moore talked about the panorama data. We're talking about academic success. We're going to talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion and efforts we're making as a district to become more anti-oppressive. And then community engagement and empowerment. We're having a communication audit that Cynthia's group is having done. And Cynthia's group is having the equity, diversity, and inclusion audit. I'm getting my audits mixed up. And then we're having a communication audit as well. So we have dueling sources of information to present to you. The equity audit will identify areas of work in that equity, diversity, and inclusion area. The community audit will identify areas of work around community engagement and ultimate community empowerment, and how we can create a district that's more servant-oriented towards our community to take their feedback and make us better. And then finally in June, Dr. Udosanata and I will we'll give you an end of the year summary. So this is just what we would call a progress monitoring time. So it's just a formative time to say, academically, this is where our kids are right now. So remember, we changed our academic measures a little bit to look a little bit more holistically at kids at each level. So we have an elementary success, and I'll be talking about those. So it's around attendance, and it's around second grade passive reading, passage reading fluency in both Spanish and English. And then Dr. Udosanata will be talking with you about middle school success and high school success and the measures associated with each of those. So just as a bit of an orientation, we haven't talked MTSS for a while, and I thought it would be helpful to reorient us into our overall system of when we provide supports for students. And remember, MTSS, we talked about this in the board at length last year, and it's this notion of that we want to provide the right instruction or the right supports for every single student at the right time. So it's kind of a medical model, if you can think about it that way. When you go to the doctor doesn't treat all of us the same. The doctor will look at you, will give you some measures to be able to say, how are you doing health-wise? And then they'll identify a program that's specifically suited towards your needs to be able to help you be more healthy. The MTSS model is exactly that. And so we want to look at students holistically. So we look at things like quality of instruction. We look at things like professional development for our staff. We take data together to be able to say, how can we design a system that supports every single student and gives them what they need when they need it, both academically, behaviorally, and social emotionally. So that's our overall goal within an MTSS, or multi-tiered system of support.
In a good way, and I'm sorry to interrupt, Craig.
No, go ahead.
But a good way to think about it is we know students by their name, we know students by their face, we know them by their story and their aspirations or dreams.
Yeah, I love that, Ethan. I would add, we also know them by their strengths and the assets that they bring, which kind of gets back to what Christy was saying. And we know that the measures that we have right now don't necessarily measure all those things. So let's dive into elementary attendance. There's a lot of little dots on this screen, and I apologize. This looks like one of those reading tests where you have to cover up one eye to be able to see the screen. Where it says Group 1, this is school year 1920, And where it says group 2, which is on my screen, it's the right-hand column. So that's school year 2021. So this is a comparison of the attendance that we've seen. And you can probably just at first glance see a lot of the numbers are pretty similar. Whereas last year we had 92% attendance in kindergarten. This year we have 90, 93 in first grade, 90% in this year in CDL. However, this isn't exactly an apples to apples comparison, because remember, we're taking attendance now in comprehensive distance learning. It's not that students are showing up for a majority of the day and then we mark them as attending. So you can be marked as being present if you participate in a synchronous video. So like as the teacher is teaching, if he or she can see that you're participating in that. You could be marked as attending if you communicate with the teacher on a day. So a parent helps a student write an email or sends a text or responds to an assignment on Remind. If a student makes visible progress on an assignment, they are counted as attending as well on that day. Or if they post or turn in an assignment while they're working at home, they're counted as present. So that's really different notion of attendance than where you sit in front of the class and say, Christy, are you here? Raise your hand, Christy. And then we mark Christy as being here or not here. So just a caveat there that we have seen for our youngest students, we've seen the biggest drop in attendance, particularly for our kindergartners and first graders, because largely those students require a lot of help to be able to get them logged in and get started throughout the day, which we knew that. So some bright spots. Superintendent Perry, did you have something to add to that? Okay, I thought you were leaning forward. Maybe you're just stretching. So some bright spots with elementary attendance. We had several of our schools start measuring not only attendance, but measuring engagement, which is a really different measure. So it's different than just turning in an assignment. It's that our kids actively engaging through CDL. So schools like Pringle, Myers, and Chavez kind of led the way in teachers filling out rubrics either on a daily or a weekly basis to say, yes, this student is attending, but they're really not engaging as deeply as we want. Let's reach out and talk to that family and see what's going on with that family, see if there's some barrier to having their student support. Four Corners has also been at the vanguard for the district on using an equity lens to identify students who need extra support. And so when they look at their engagement chart and they look at their attendance chart, they look at that and say, are there groups of students that for some reason aren't attending? And how can we eliminate those barriers? Which is a perfect question to ask through an equity lens. How can we make sure that they have access? So that's how they've targeted their students for limited in-person to be able to bring those students in. Or they've done dozens of home visits to go and visit, stay outside the home, of course. We don't go into the house physically, but they visit the porch of the home, I guess is what I would say, to be able to brainstorm with the family how they can have their students log in. Almost all of our elementary schools also went to a single day login, which means when we first designed this, we didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know best practice. And so we had where elementary students would log in for a half an hour, then they would go and work on something at home, and then they would need to re-log in. Every time they re-logged in, we'd get fewer kids. So we would start with, a pretty strong number, half would re-log in, and then we'd take a break. Another half of that would re-log in. And by the end of the day, there's like 5 kids. So our elementary teachers, by and large, have a single point of login now where kids log in once and they just stay on for the entire instructional period. They may go away and work on something in their room, but the teacher just keeps the login running. And that's something that we've learned that's really helped with attendance. And then finally, supporting families with technology and internet connectivity is an ongoing thing for our families to make sure that they're logged in and able to attend. So now we're moving on to one of the academic measures. And remember, we use second grade passage reading fluency in both English and Spanish. And just as a point to know, The window for this testing closed January 22nd. So this is relatively fresh data. For the passive reading fluency in English, we had 2,295 students complete the reading test. For Spanish, which I'll show you in just a minute, we had 552 students complete the test, which is pretty much reflective of a portion of our students who are receiving instruction primarily in Spanish. Those were the ones who take both the English test and the Spanish test. And then, but if they're only receiving their instruction in English, they only take the test in English. So this, Director Lippold, do you want to ask questions throughout, or should we wait till the end? I'm not sure what the protocols are for this one.
Let's wait till the end and save the questions, because that way we can go around and make sure everybody gets a chance.
Okay, I can definitely answer it when we get to that point. Assuming it's not too hard of a question, I can at least try to answer it. So the thing to remember on these bar charts are these are measuring high risk. So we don't want high charts here, or high lines for each one. And I think this second grade reading passage really shows the disparate impacts of our different subcategories and subpopulations. And before we dive into this data, though, I do want to say our teachers have worked Herculean tasks to be able to move the dial for our families. And so I think at times, sometimes when we look at data like this, we can bring a deficit mindset to it. So we can say, think of all the learning loss and think of all the things that we've lost this year. But I think it's important to realize, and I'm going to point out some things. So for instance, on this graph, the loss from fall to winter is very small for most populations, even though the complexity of the task that they read increases. So typically we have fewer students reach proficiency in the winter as in the fall, because it gets harder and harder. What they need to read gets harder and harder. So I think that this shows there are gaps, and for specifically looking at our African-American Black students, nearly 40% of them are what is categorized as high risk as a percentile. So they are not reading at the level that we would like to have them read to be able to be a successful reader by third grade. Native American and our Alaskan Native students are about 30% would be in the high risk. And then you can see the subgroups going down across from there for each of the racialized subgroups. So I think it's important to realize there are impacts, but overall, our students are holding their own to be able to continue to learn to read. Here's a year-to-year comparison that I just threw in here, just so you can understand like the difference between having in-person and having CDL. Again, a high bar is not what we want. We would like low bars across if we can, because these are students who are at high risk. So you can see it really varies by population. So the high-risk students for our Asian kids who identify as agents and families who identify actually went down this year. And so there was a drop in the number of students who are high risk. And so if you could do the inverse, 9% of students who would be categorized as an Asian student this year, which means 91% of those students are either above or on grade level. So the inverse of each of these is true as well. And you can see there's really disparate impacts across our system on different demographic groups that we have. So the next one I believe is Spanish, is that right? There we go. So remember, Spanish is given to students who are receiving either dual language or they're in one of our Literacy Squared programs. And this is where you can really see large disparate impacts across. And so all students tested, it was relatively equal from fall to winter, but students who qualify as English language learners, which is the second to the last category, and students who qualify for our migrant education services from fall to winter saw a big slide in their reading and in their passage reading fluency in Spanish. And part of this is particularly for our dual language students.
I think we may have lost Dr. Sproles. Maybe he ran out of some bandwidth in his home. So nonetheless, I'm not going to capitalize on the same points that he had and Superintendent Perry. Feel free to chime in. But these are the second grade reading passages, and you can see they're identified right now by ethnicity. And then this is the year to year, right? And so we can see, we definitely see some patterns in terms of the 1920 school year versus the 2021 school year, right? So, and it looks like from this standpoint, there's been a significant amount, or this is high risk. So we know that we have some work to do when it comes to providing interventions. We know we have some work to do when it comes to interventions with all student groups. And our administrators are aware of this, our teachers are aware of this, and they're hard at work trying to determine the best practices, and also ask questions as to why that there's these changes from one year to the other. Importantly, something that we identified earlier is that we want to be able to do CDL well. And I know that a lot of this is maybe confirmation of the challenges that come with trying to do some degree of reading instruction to second graders online. So those are things that we're aware of and that we're working hard to address. I think Dr. Sproles is back with us, but Superintendent Perry?
Yeah, and I was just going to say, as we're thinking into summer school and how we capture some learning during summer school, and we think about our migrant summer school and our summer school for our students learning English, this will be really important data as we're planning those summer programs as well.
And so when we look at moving forward and planning our supports, the great thing about having these KPIs is it gives us an in-the-moment snapshot so that we don't wait until it might be too late to be responsive to students' needs. And so in our learning model, in our hybrid model, which again starts in the next week, there's going to be intensive reading supports that we can tackle in person. And that was one of the reasons that we felt it was important to start with our youngest learners. And so there's going to be a literacy focus. Importantly, we need to continue to find innovative ways to provide supports for students both in person and also digitally. So if there's something that I'm confident about is that even though we know that CDL isn't a viable, at this point, not a viable substitute, we have become better at it as time has gone on. So now that we can maximize the best of both worlds. And so that's something that we intend to do. And as Superintendent Perry just mentioned, we do intend to provide summer supports for learning loss, right? And we want to make it engaging too. So anything to add, Superintendent Perry, before I jump into the secondary?
Nope, I'll let you move on to secondary.
Okay, thank you. So our focus in the secondary is, I'll start with middle school. So with middle school, it's math supports, or math achievement and language arts achievement. And then at the high school, our two areas of focus for KPIs are our 9th grade on track and our 12th grade completion rate, so this is kind of the moment you have all been waiting for, since I received a few questions about this before this part of the report. Just to frame this up a little bit, before I talk about the data, I want to share just ways that I like to approach data from an instructional leadership standpoint that I think can also help the board and the public understand the importance of formative assessments. So first off, I want to share that sometimes it's really easy for us to draw a conclusion when we look at data, or maybe to validate a hypothesis that we have. But what we really encourage our level directors and our principals to do is to look closely at the data and use that as an inquiry tool. And so, whereas in the past, we may have looked at SAT scores, graduation rates, and reading scores and formative and standardized tests, after the fact. What the purpose of this dashboard is to do is to give both the board, but also our building leaders, a snapshot of what's going on so we can ask questions and help adjust in the moment, right? So that's just something that I want to share with you, as I think it's important to frame how we're looking at data, not as always a causal, but as a way for us to be inquiry based. That being said, we chose a lot of our KPIs based on correlations or relationships with student success. So the first one is middle school math distribution. I'm not going to share with you our language arts grade distribution because the numbers are almost parallel, and you do have access to the dashboard, so you can look at that at your own leisure. But something that we are noticing from one year to the next is last year we had a less amount of failures, right? And so we're going to ask, why is that so? And we're gonna try to find ways to improve the level of instruction and intervention and engagement, so that we can adjust for what we think is failures and lack of academic success in math due to CDL, right? And then also we need to come up with a response to combat the learning loss that's happened. But if you look over at the A's and B's, you're seeing that there's some parity, right? So there are some bright spots. Something that you can do on your dashboard too, and it's not present on this slide, but when you access the dashboard, you can manipulate subgroups, school year, quarter one versus quarter two, to really see trends, patterns, areas of growth, and areas of deficiency. And also, so for this slide, what we have is we want to try to maybe find a subgroup that might need additional support, right? So what this one is our ELL versus our non-ELL students, right? And right here, we can see some disproportionality that we need to give attention to. And it's that we have a lot of our ELL students not being successful in math, right? And that's measured by the amount of percentages receiving an F or a D at this point in the school year. Again, because we have this data now, it gives our building leaders, our MTSS teams, an opportunity to target who needs to come in for limited in-person instruction, who needs maybe a knock and connect, and just other strategies for reducing the numbers of failures and improving the amount of success, right? And so a good question that Director Blasi asked is, what are we going to do in the moment? So at the middle school level, we have teams of staff who are tracking down students. We're leveraging our supports that and our support staff that we hired through SIA dollars, and also our existing support staff to identify students who need extra supports. We're sending some of our specialists out to do knock and connects to make sure that students have what they need, and to try to ask questions that identify where students might be struggling and how we can support. We're increasing limited in-person instruction, and we'll be really ramping that up over the next few weeks. Towards the end of the trimester last year, we were only able to bring up to 10% in. So at a given high school or middle school like Waldo, for instance, we were able to bring in maybe up to 100 students. Now we don't have that limit. And so we're working with transportation, we're getting the word out, and our goal is to bring in the hundreds at each of our 10 middle schools when it comes to limited in-person instruction. And really in quarter three, gave every student an opportunity to come onto campus to receive some level of academic engagement and support. Also, we want to create more incentives for students to do well in school by creating more opportunities for athletics, extracurricular, and co-curricular activities. And then also we want to continue deepening our work on CDL. And what that means is looking at more ways to make a robust, interactive online experience for students while they're working at home, and identifying ways and new strategies that we're gaining as we get deeper and deeper into our experience of delivering instruction in CDL. So let's move on to the high school real quick. So as we mentioned earlier, we do have a ninth grade metric that's ninth grade on track. And we have an internal dashboard that our level directors and our building principals use to assess how many credits a student has earned and also what their success is like in algebra. And so if a student's earned 3 credits at this point in the year, that's a good indicator that they'll be on track to graduate when they get to their senior year. Additionally, if a student's showing success in Algebra 1 or higher, that's another really strong indicator that they'll do well when it comes to their senior year and graduating on time. And so at this point, we know that we have some work to do internally. We're still working on the dashboard. We had a dashboard up, but we noticed that the formatting it from semesters, which is what we had last year, to quarters, was a challenge. And so we have our data team working on it, and we anticipate having that dashboard up and operating for the board to view soon. But for a bright spot, there was a question that Director Hyen asked about how our seniors are doing. And I think Director Blasi asked that as well. And so our bright spot is our seniors are continuing to show progress, strong progress towards at least amassing the credits to graduate on time. And so you need 24 credits to graduate. So at this point in the year, if you maximize your 8 opportunities for credit before you would go into credit recovery, we're showing that 93% at West, 87% at Sprague. Basically the range of 80 to 93% are on track. Now, this is that time of year when you might have a number that looks like it might be in the 70s, and then you do the full court press, and that number comes up by quite a bit when you get to April, May, June. And so, whereas you might look at a McKay or a North and say, that doesn't look as good as our 86% or 84% graduation rate, at this point in the year, it's actually typical for some of our seniors to get a case of senioritis. And that's it's this point of the year too, where our high school teams design almost a customized plan for every student who's not on track. Okay, moving on. So moving on to like what our response is. Well, we're going to expand LIPI, limited in-person instruction, and I'm really pleased to share that our high schools a couple of weeks ago went from 560 students served total in limited in-person instruction to 1,200 students served total. And had we not had that ice storm last week, we would have had closer to 2,400 students served last week, but we weren't able to conduct LIPI. So again, our goal is to provide every student an opportunity to come onto campus during third quarter, but our priority really is with our seniors, students with limited English language proficiency, and students in special education programs to come onto campus and get the benefits of some in-person instruction. And sometimes it's just having a structured place for students to be able to engage work and get through some roadblocks that an adult can help them through. And so we know that all students can benefit from that as well. So just an example of the ways that we're engaging our students who need extra support. After having reviewed our data, McNary, we're in South, we're all engaging in something we call a full court press, which is giving a lot of attention to students who need supports. And so we want at McNary, their mantra is to re-engage and re-enroll. They're trying to focus on students getting makeup work done. And so they do something called, they do progress reports every 3 weeks. And in those progress reports, they start to assess what's happening. Is it maybe a low test, or maybe there's not adequate completion and submission rates. And so at McNary, they assessed and determined that they need more students to be turning in work. And so they're doing something that we call in the academic and the high school world bird dogging students, so that they can come in and get their homework completed. We're also looking to provide extensions, which is also trying to re-engage our students by providing opportunities for tutoring and also opportunities for clubs when we can do so safely. At South, they're also doing a full court press. So they have an academic hotline. They're trying to bring students in, seniors in for their core, supports, and core are your math, language arts, social studies, and sciences. Because if a senior still needs their core classes, it means that they might be one of those seniors that are on the verge of maybe not graduating, because the only core class you should have left in your senior year is language arts. Again, we're doing home visits, so we really are trying to engage students. And a similar priority at South as at McNary, and this is the same across all of our high schools, is to be self-contained, or to support our self-contained students, our LEP students, and our seniors with core. So LEP stands for Limited English Proficiency. And so we are really trying to be strategic at targeting different groups to make sure that we're providing a variety of supports. And I'm just pulling up McNary and South, but I do want you to know all of our 6 comprehensives plus Roberts are doing a phenomenal job of bringing students in and coming up with a strategy. And I'm pleased to say that CTEC is going to be one of the first schools to really bring students back to school. And they're already doing a lot of robust, limited in-person instruction. So that's a bright spot that we're pleased to share with the public about our high school and our secondary in general. That was a mouthful. So are there any questions?
Dr. Oderson and Superintendent Perry, thank you. And I just want to kind of go around and start with Advisor Mabinton.
So right now, in person, if I'm correct, for secondary is like mostly seniors that are struggling. Correct?
It's targeted groups. So there are some seniors. So we are targeting seniors who are at risk for not graduating or demonstrated that they need additional support. But we're also bringing in a lot of targeted groups who would benefit from in-person instruction. So again, students in special education classes, and students with limited English proficiency or ELL designation who would benefit from in-person supports.
Okay. That was my only clarity. I just wanted to make sure it wasn't just seniors. It was more like struggling in general.
It's more holistic.
Okay.
Thank you. And I'm sorry I didn't clarify that in my presentation.
So let's now start with Director Goss, and then I'll go around as I see the screen. So everybody gets a chance. Director Goss.
I'm working on it. There it goes.
Oh, you got done it. Yeah, I can hear you now.
So if I go into the dashboard today, where's the data coming from and how current is it?
So, and I'll let Superintendent Perry add on to my response, but our data is pulled directly from our student information network or system, which is called Synergy. So it's live time and it updates every night. And so let's say for some reason a student had it incomplete, but their grade was changed today, that might be reflected tomorrow. Right. So that's where the data is pulled from. And I forgot, what's the second part of your question?
Well, tell me about Synergy too. Is there anything that is academically an academic assessment on that? So, yeah, Synergy just looks at grades at the end of the term?
Yes. So the teachers have a grade book, which is academic in nature, and they upload their grades using an online grade book. And then that speaks to Synergy. Synergy also is what we use for attendance. It's what we use for discipline data. It's like a data warehouse that we have for our district.
But Kathy, it's all put together into a dashboard for us that we use. So you don't have to worry about this background of Synergy, but no, any of the things that can be updated nightly are updated nightly. So like attendance, is updated nightly. Grades, you don't see an active grade book, but you know that end of Q2 grades are in there. So there's going to be very few changes when we're in Q3, because unless they're just changing of grades. So there is pretty as up to date as you can get it without drilling down from the whole listing. And then like the Easy CBM data is in there, Craig, is that correct?
Yeah, but that one's only 3 times a year, Director Goss. And so the Easy CBM data that I referenced was given January 22nd. And that measure is given once in the fall, once in the winter, and once in the spring. But we do have progress monitoring data that's given weekly, but it's not reflected in the dashboard in the same way. So it's not real time. What Ethan was referring to are grades and attendance. Those are uploaded each night.
And so what you have access to look at, Director Goss, is a dashboard that's called Spark. And the user interface is intended to be user friendly. So whereas Synergy is really like a data collection and housing and recording tool, the Spark dashboard is configured in a way that makes it easy for you to quickly access the data without having to go through too many steps and analyze the data and ask questions. And we'd be happy to walk you through how to go through the Spark dashboard again, if you'd like that.
Okay, if I, as a teacher, go in, then every evening I must have to input data from my book that's recorded on the dashboard. Is that what you're saying?
Not necessarily. So a teacher has a grade book within Synergy. And so they have a grade book, and let's say I gave a quiz on the Revolutionary War. I can go into my grade book, and I would do this as a teacher. I would do it every day at the end of the day. I would grade the work, and then I would submit an entry. So Susie Jones got an 87%, which is a B. I update that, and then that gives them a summative percentage of what their grade is. And once I hit publish on that grade, which would be at the ending of a grading period, that's when that change is reflected in the dashboard.
Okay.
And so the teacher doesn't actually go to a dashboard. They're still just on their grade book. So it's not an extra step for them. The important thing is that parents and students could also look at their updated grades in real time through Student View or Parent View. But all of this is through the same kind of program, which is really complicated. And so for the benefit of KPIs that we want to bring your attention to.
Okay, are we going to, at the end of this year, as we used to, go into any scholastic test, any standard academic tests that we can compare school to school or room to room or anything else?
I can comment on that if that would be okay, Superintendent Perry, that the summative tests that are currently being endorsed by the Department of Education are under review. And so the big test that we've given is the Smarter Balance test. And that's the big one where we can compare not only classroom to classroom, school to school, but state to state for all of the states that are giving that test. That is still up in the air on whether we will be giving that at all. The one test we are giving is the English Language Proficiency Assessment, or ELPA. We are giving that currently. It's an in-person test that we're giving to small groups of students to measure English language proficiency. But we will come back. There was some guidance given actually just today that we received from some of our colleagues in Portland Public, that there is some guidance coming out about our state applying for a waiver in regards to those big summative tests that we typically present. So if we give them, of course, we will for sure present those findings to the school board.
Thank you.
I know that they're controversial because they do take a lot of time and all of the rest, they're expensive. But without those, I have trouble believing we can figure out where the child is. And if we want to meet him where he is or she is, and continue from there. What kind of material, do we have materials available to do that?
We do, and that's why we are still giving our Easy CBM assessments. So you saw the reading, but that's why we're doing that 3 times a year, because we actually think those are more informative to classroom teachers than the Smarter Balanced. So if we could choose, we would choose to do the assessments we're currently doing rather than the summative SBAC, just because I think it gives us more up-to-date information.
Right.
Thank you. Director Kylo, do you have any questions?
I don't think I have any questions. I thought the presentation was good. It looks like the plans are well laid out. I had one question about one of the indicators, however. I understand that Algebra 1 as a freshman is one of the indicators. I'm getting from parents I've talked to and other folks that there's a little bit of grade inflation in the Algebra 1 ranks. So I don't know how much emphasis is being placed down on the math teachers in the schools, that is one of the benchmarks that's being looked at. But I'm getting reports from different folks in different sectors and different high schools that the kids are getting A's, B's, and C's out of Algebra 1, but can't multiply 3 times 7. That the math facts piece is completely missing, but they're still passing with quite good grades, actually. So I'm concerned about that as perhaps how that's being used. So perhaps as one of your pieces of inquiry that you mentioned, that might be something to look at, is what are we doing to ensure there isn't the grade inflation at that level? So that's all, but I thought it looked good.
Thank you.
Let's go to Dr. Lepol-Pion.
Just one thing I'd like to just add to Director Kylo is that in order for a student to graduate, they need to demonstrate proficiency in math, and there are some work samples. So a student can do this through demonstrating proficiency on the Smarter Balance, and if that's not available, they also go through a work sample process where they are given a certain number of algebra problems that are standards based, and if the teacher will review that, and if they think the student did a good job, then they pass that out onto an outside judge or scorer who will grade that to ensure that students had met the algebra standards. So that doesn't speak as much to grade inflation, and that's something that we will look into, and I appreciate you bringing that to our attention. But it does speak to, at the end of the road, our students do need to know math to graduate.
Thank you, Dr. Udasinata. Let's go to Director Lepol-Pion.
Hey, how you doing? I had just a couple things I want to say. First, just, it's very clear, like Director Kylo said, this is done very well. It's clear you guys did your homework, and I want to thank you for your ability to be innovative and research things and learn and grow from what you're doing. I think your example with elementary attendance, switching up the login and making sure that our systems are made to fit the kids, instead of just forcing kids to fit our system. I think that's a really good example of that. So I want to say thank you. I had a question about the slides. This is when I gave the speech, the presentation. On the charts where it says African American, Alaska Native, and / Native American, Asian, Hispanic, multiracial, Native, and white. So that second Native, is that Native Pacific Islander, or what does that second Native mean?
Yes, it does. It's Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. I hadn't even noticed that, Director Lippold, that it just says Native ... until you said that. That's the group. So it's Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. That's the subcategory.
Okay, that's what I thought. I just wanted to check in. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and then also with your high school mid-year response, first off, I think that's a really good idea. I think you're doing a great job on that and doing it well. What I would love to have, and I think maybe our board would, and of course as a board leadership, but I would love to see, because it looks like McNary and South are both taking different approaches as to what they're doing. And I'm assuming other schools are as well. And so I would love to see what's working, what isn't, on a more frequent basis. Not because we want to tell them what to do, but so that way we can know and learn with our schools on what are we doing to better educate our students and make sure our seniors are on track, because that's really important. So I would just love updates on, hey, this is working, this isn't working, here's what we're doing now. I think that'd be really cool to have.
That's a great point, Director Leopold. Director Blasi.
Thank you. First, just one quick comment, and then I do have a question regarding SBAC. And Department of Ed has been examining the efficacy of SBAC for many, many years, and so it'll be interesting to see if they eventually come out with their findings on that. But to Kathy's point, it's important to have a way to measure, and especially when funds are tied to Title I funding and other federal funding, but it's interesting when a large district has the ability to implement other forms of testing when smaller districts who don't necessarily have that level of resources across the district. I think that's always been a challenge for the Department of Ed, is that equity across the state. So I know they've struggled with how to make that testing equitable across the state when large districts can implement something different, whereas a smaller district doesn't have that ability. But I have a question. So going back to our middle school math, obviously going from the 8% of students who are failing math this last term to a quarter of our students failing math. And I understand, implementing LIPI and getting those students back into the building for 2 days a week. But once you're failing math, as we all know, it's incredibly hard to overcome that the next year or even the same year. So what in addition to 2 days limited in person will there be available? I know some schools have implemented, student mentoring for some of these, but what in addition to just our regular math class to get, a quarter of our students to not be failing math?
Director Blasi, that's a good question. And what we're gonna have to do is really lean on our interventions and our MTSS structure that helps us identify students that need supports. We also have data teams. And so we have a variety of structures in place to identify who needs the support. And then the next step is to identify what they need the support with. Again, the assumption, and I'm not trying to sound surly here, but the assumption for somebody like me is that the students don't know math, but it might be a completion issue. There might be a specific gap that's preventing the student from getting to a next level. It might just need the student might need a structured space to engage with math. And so we're gonna really, our building leaders understand the charge, and they understand the urgency, and we will be relying on indicators or on interventions to support our students, and taking a multifaceted approach.
Thank you.
And even the right now CDL plus limited in person, we have to give them the extra, and we also then have to think about what extra do they need in some summer programs as well, because we've got to be really sure that either we restructure some math for kids that are failing so they get that foundational math next year, or do some of that work in the summer as well.
Thank you. Dr. Hyan, you have?
Yeah, Jesse our Director Lipple kind of touched on what I'm going to ask for. So the high school mid-year response, you had McNary and South, and I thought that was pretty interesting. What I'm kind of concerned about is high school completion. Of course, just talking about 12th grade, the schools having the greatest challenges are McKay and North. And I would like to see what McKay and North, and then probably really all the high schools, how are they addressing the challenges that some of the students are having, kind of like this mid-year response that McNary and South are doing?
Yeah, thank you, Director Hyen, and do know that actually, Director Ramirez meets with his high school principals every Monday for about an hour and a half, and they submitted their plans for what they're doing to address these needs. And it was my decision, out of the brevity of this presentation, to only show 2 schools. But I do want to reassure you that all of our schools have just as robust of response efforts right now to serve students. And I want to give kudos to the McKay team, because they did bring in the most students for limited in-person instruction on the week of February 1st through February 8th. They brought in about 350 to 400 students, which is a sizable amount. And so, again, I'd be happy to share at more detail with the board. I just, for the sake of how long our meetings were, want to provide a snapshot.
So could we get an email with that information? And then, I don't know, maybe you might put it on your website or something for anybody in the public that's interested. But I would be interested, if you've got that information, to see it sooner rather than later.
All right. Dr. Hine, that's a good question. I want to go to the Advisor Mabinton. You have raised your hand virtually, but...
I have a question. Going back to the 2nd grade, I think maybe it was reading. It was high risk levels, and it was students of color. They had high risk. What are we doing about that in 1st grade, or maybe before that? Are we doing something that could change those, you know?
That's a beautiful question. How do we start catching them sooner?
Dr. Sproles, and there might be an answer that we used to do and what we are doing, given that's from 1st grade to 2nd grade, and they've been in CDL now. The things we had done before are different than the things we can do now, but I'll turn it to Dr. Sproles.
Yeah, and that's a great question. And how are we getting in front of this data? And I love that you bring up 1st grade as well, because we know 1st grade is a really key reading year to be able to, as kids learn. So some of the things that we're doing are actually pretty darn similar in CDL as they would be if we were in person. It's just the application is different. And so for a reading lesson, we have a dedicated literacy block. And so we have about 90 minutes of our day. And an important thing for the board to realize is that even though we've decreased our instructional day down to 5 hours for hybrid learning, we're still maintaining 90 minutes of literacy instruction, because we feel like, particularly at K1-2, and there's a lot of research to support this, it's a foundational skill that students need to have. And so some ways that we support students are that we give a whole group lesson, and then we break into smaller and smaller groups, depending on how much intensive supports that student needs. And we've gotten pretty good at it, actually, doing it digitally. So it's when you work in a group and then you break into a smaller group online. We do that, and then a classified assistant or the actual teacher will give a reading lesson for those students that's specifically designed to meet whatever skill they're missing. So we have the ability to say, okay, so these students, this group of students might know their letter names, for instance. They just don't know how to put those letter names and sounds together to form words. So we have an intervention to be able to do that. This group of students can put those words together, but they can't put them together in a fluent sentence. So we have an intervention to be able to teach kids how to do that. This group of students can do it fluently, but they can't understand what they're reading. So they need a comprehension and vocabulary intervention. So we have specific interventions to be able to do that based on the needs of the student. Now, I will say, when we have them in person, we can break them up into even smaller groups and in the moment address, that's what our elementary teachers are masterful at, in the moment addressing and pre-correcting kids and to be able to get them on track, which is harder in CDL. It's just harder to do that in a group of 20. But I love the question. And as you can tell, I'm very, very interested in the art of teaching reading. There's a science, people say, oh, it's not rocket science. I actually have a father-in-law who is a rocket scientist, and there's more research on this, on how to teach reading than people realize.
Well, thank you very much. That's a wonderful question, Advisor Binton. You know, I just have a broader question. So this Spark data dashboard really captures some disadvantaged, you know, there's a disparity in different groups, right? What is the possibility of having, say, a nonprofit, which are culturally, you know, cultural groups or different groups, let's say an African-American Black nonprofit, working on some kind of mentoring for Black students? I'm just using that as an example, as a way to supplement and yet use your KPI indicator to show that it's making a meaningful change as a way to boost along with what the school district is doing. Because from what I heard so far is the entire burden is shouldered by the school and the teachers. And is there a role for community groups or as an adjunct to what you're doing, and yet you can monitor using?
A really good point. And we really noticed that in our student investment account work, is that we could use more nonprofit support by our side. And so we heard that over and over again. In fact, in Portland Public, a lot of their student investment account work and dollars, they sent a big portion onto the really strong culturally specific based organizations to help really elevate social, emotional, and academic achievement for some of their groups. We do have a partnership with ERCO right now, who helps with our refugee families. They're gonna begin working at Waldo and North to really engage families in that. So that's one example. I had another one on the tip of my tongue, and
That's all right.
Jacqueline Benavides, who's our community outreach director, is really working hard to make connections with the various support groups.
Correct.
And even the support we've given in the grant writing for the African American Student Success Grants. We had 3 grants that we helped support through grant writing, because we really want to kind of help prop up any new nonprofits in our community because we agree that we can't do it all alone. If you think about the graduation gains at North and McKay that we've seen, that's a result of that public-private partnership with Mountain West Investments and how they are helping us mentor those schools and change the trajectory. So then that's just another example of it. And Craig, did you have any others, Craig or Ethon?
No, I think referencing the African American Black Student Success Act grants are important. And one of them, Dr. Chandragiri, actually working with Dr. Richardson, who you might remember through the SIA work, who's now the NAACP president, was to create an after-school program for African American Black students, because it's something we heard from the community that we have African American Black students sprinkled throughout the district, but we don't have enough of them to have a core group at any one school. So we wrote the grant. Unfortunately, it was not awarded, but those grants will be coming back again. And so I think that we do have an opportunity here to really build up. And as Christy said, IRCO is the International Refugee Center of Oregon, targeting specifically our Somali and Swahili speaking students and families. Again, another group that we heard from in the SIA work, that they were asking for this type of support.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate this, opportunity, and you're all doing a wonderful job of, I really want to thank Superintendent Perry and all of you for giving us the opportunity to use Sparks database. Often we can go to ODE and ESSA at a federal level. Those are historic data, which will give us like 10 years or 15 years data. But what is happening today is what I found using. When you use these two, then I feel that would be a good way to map this equity gaps in different communities and start asking intentionally, how are we reaching out to different communities? And I also sent a little outline. And often we talk about disparity, at least the way I see it. Is it a symptom of underlying inequities, or are there really deep down structures? That's perhaps another way to use the data to kind of drill down and see what policies or things are really the underlying difficulties. Just like Advisor Mebington asked, is the child able to begin to get the grasp of reading in the first grade, as opposed to simply saying by the time they reach high school, they're such a wide gap, right? So the data, I feel, will be very useful, and hope. I don't know if our teachers can also have access to Sparks, and staff can have access to Sparks, so they can really start seeing at a macro level.
We do have the data team structures for them to look at the data. The easy CBM data, for example, isn't, it's designed for us to look at it at a systems level. So the board can look at it, the big system. We then look at it at the system level and the school by school level. The school looks at it by the classroom level and the groups within the school level. So the real purpose of the easy CBM data is for all the way out to the classroom, for them to have access to formative assessments so they can change ahead of a summative assessment. But the school teams use that data. So that's why we embed it within that MTSS structure. So you're monitoring here, we're monitoring here. We've been doing that before we ever were asked for this, we ever thought to think, oh, let's bring this into the boardroom. We've been monitoring that structure and have data routines around it, as do the schools, as do the classroom teachers. And that's where you get that full health of the system.
Is there a plan at some point to bring the data back to the community groups or communities, so that the community facing data, so that community can take ownership? Because these data numbers are basically our children. And then they can start asking advocacy or whatever based on the data. So it kind of overrides the implicit biases or whatever other misunderstanding that communities can have without having that.
Yeah, I think that would be, we should figure out from the community, how do we collectively help determine what data is important to the community to see? Because we can present data, we can give you the dashboard all day long. If you don't think it's important and it isn't, then it isn't the place you're going to go look for information. So we really need to think about what are the data points for the community. And I think that could be a really healthy discussion. And it might start with thinking about within the results policy, how do you as the board, what do you as the board think is really important for you to monitor in results, and what key performance indicators. We've laid out what we believe is the best research around it, but a board discussion around it, and then a community discussion. Because again, we can create data all day long. We have more than, but unless people want it to use it, that's the trick. I think the work we're doing around discipline will be of high interest to the community, and how we think about, because that's high interest, then how do you report progress in a way the community wants to see it and then can understand it? Because then that's that community accountability around it. So I think that's a great place for us to start that conversation.
Thank you very much. I think we need to end this meeting. And I really appreciate this. Was a wonderful work session and very important topics.
Could I ask could I just do one recap of information we're going to give to you? And because I'm trying to think about what do you collectively want. So if there's something not on the list that is just a one-person thing and you don't think it's important, just let me know. But I'm trying to really collectively ask what's important to you. So the VIX audit financial statements in the past few years, we'll get that. We're going to work on the LVC proposal, more fiscal oversight during the expansion period. I think the equity question around enrollment at VIX, I think he answered it pretty well. Sylvia will email you the community engagement sessions if you want to sign up for one. Ethan will give you a full report on high school interventions and in a written format. And then I think we need a little bit of more clarity around middle school and interventions, especially around failure in math.
You know, what would be, I'm just asking the board in general and Superintendent Perry, what would be a good point where we can sit down, maybe have a session on redesigning the result policy, which is in sync with KP, you know, your strategic plan, because so that, you know, it's not like you're adding more burden, but we can have a seamless.
July 1st.
Down the street.
July 1st.
July, okay. July 1st.
Yeah.
So July 1st is a Tuesday?
I don't care. July 1st. Sharon understands.
You know how
I'm sorry. I am laughing out loud. That was good, Paul.
You know, Director Pello, you always want to retire and then push the thing to somebody else. That's not fair. We need to use your wisdom of all these years.
That's what I said, July 1st.
Okay.
We can call any day July 1st, don't worry.
Okay. And then tomorrow we have the implicit bias training part 2.
Part 2. That is correct.
At what time?
1:30 to 4:30.
Yep.
1:30 to, oh great, 3 hours, okay.
All right.
It'll go by very fast. Dr. Marks is
Oh my God, he's
highly skilled.
Oh.
Okay, the second time I saw part 1, it didn't go that fast.
Remembering what have you.
So that's why I'm asking. You're sure?
Yes, it'll go fast.
And it was your picture.
Okay, Director Blasi, you want to say something?
Yeah. So Kathy, just so you know, you're not on mute.
I'm not on mute?
No.
Oh, that's too bad.
That wasn't my comment. Just real quick on the back to the charter school contract. Superintendent, you mentioned maybe taking a look at that, maybe their first year or whatever time period you all decide for more financial reporting. I would like to, and I don't know if this is the right place to mention this, but I would like to see that contract with them amended, because it currently is amended from monthly to quarterly. And I think for that first year or whatever time period you all decide, keeping it monthly would probably be, might be a little less risky.
Yeah, I didn't say that. We're going to research it and put some contract language in.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but thank you.
Well, with that, have a good night, and the meeting is adjourned.